So I wanted to launch into a rant, and it's a critique of the Republicans. Because I can still critically think. Unlike what they tried to do, they tried to stamp it out. What in Texas, and stamping books that would teach kids like that out of their legislators and everything in Florida and all this other stuff, and trying to push their version of history down the throats of everybody. No, but what I wanted to say is that Republicans like to preach and pander a lot by saying the Democrats hate America and they hate, they've got no sense of patriotism, and, the Republicans are the true red blooded patriots of America, and that they're so big and bad, and that, they are the real patriots, and those of us on the left are, phony patriot. Phony and not really, we don't really love America, we don't have the same red blooded attitude of it. And there's a couple of points that I would raise to this, which is just one thing I don't like is this kind of idea of blind patriotism, of loving America despite, and then deciding that we shouldn't push towards a more perfect republic. We shouldn't try to improve America in any way because it's already the greatest thing in the history of ever. And it's like there's no room for improvement under that school of thought. But that's not really where I wanted to go. It's this notion that Republicans love America. That Charlie Kirk's wife was like, he loved you, America. He was so in love with you, and what I wanted to say to that canard is just I would like to give thanks to Stephanie Kuntz for writing the book The Way We Never Were, and saying this about everything. Thank you. You offered some of my most salient criticisms, and one of the few people that has taught me more about the past than almost anybody else, in very academic and astute and erudite your writing on your part. But I would say that a lot of these people are so brain-addled and unable to think that they actually think like the vision that you see on Leave It to Beaver, right, as a television show, is the reality of what 1950s America was really like. And yet we know, for instance, in 1950 teenage pregnancy rates were a lot higher. We know that there were numerous problems with society that wouldn't have been explored on those shows and everything, and that it was kind of a time in America of so many stifling rules and control. I mean, they were always lecturing people about the way to be, and you were getting all these old-timey bits of advice about how to live your life and how you were supposed to be, and all this other stuff in this atmosphere, right? And they were, but it was a time of repression in America. It was a time of where there was all this stuff that was boiling under the surface that made the 1960s kind of feel inevitable as what would come out of it. But what I wanted to say is that it doesn't seem like Republicans have really truly loved America since 1950. And I want to say this about them because they say that they love America and everything, but they want to bring it back to the way it was in 1900, and all this other stuff about them. Like, so here's the thing, about them and their alleged patriotism that they say that they have, all right? Because I've gotten better at expressing myself and verbiage wise, but there's an image that they have of an idealized America that only exists in their heads, that is the Leave It to Beaver version of America. That's the fantasy America, okay? So that's what I call it. I call it fantasy America. And Republicans only love fantasy America. The moment that they are confronted with the reality of the melting pot and the diversity of our society, and they encounter the blacks and the college educated and the Muslim elected officials, and the madness and the maddening spiral of having a completely multicultural society where you've got a melting pot of all these cultures coming together into this one big congealed mass. They hate that version of America, but that's the only America there actually is. That's the real America. They don't love America. They only love fantasy America. They hate the real America. They hate the much more brown and multicultural America that of which I spent my youth as a member of the culture of, despite being very stark white. They don't love the real thing. They're trying to purge that society of all the people that they consider the enemy within. They're trying to get rid of them. They're trying to run them off and into the sea basically all the time because they don't like what this country has turned into. So they don't they want to change it back to the way it supposedly was, but it was never that way to begin with. It was not as they see it. It's not 1950s America was not really what they see. I mean, it does have some merits in its favor. Like, yeah, sure, your income levels would be higher. Corporate America wasn't playing the well, back then, corporate America actually valued its employees. It didn't, treat them like they were disposable the way it does today. People were, an employee was seen as the company's greatest asset, whereas now, they're seen as a liability to be let go of whenever, in corporate America. It's really sad with the complete degeneration of values and everything that happened in that department. But yeah, that's what's happened in our country and everything, and that's not a good change. That's taking place within the corporate atmosphere. It definitely has not gone in the right direction inside corporate America. I will give the nostalgia X all of that, but there were various aspects of 1950 society, like the skyrocketed rate of teen pregnancy, and the fact that only white men really seemed to be doing quite well in 1950s, and women were very in a much more backwards place than they are today. Back then they would not like it. If they got transported back in a time machine back to that period, they, let me tell you, and the ads on television were often deeply sexist and everything. That old timey racism, sexism, misogyny that you see everywhere. They don't really love America. They love an idealized version of America that only exists in their heads. And so they say the Democrats lack patriotism, but I would actually say it's the Republicans who lack patriotism.